Like many others, I was quite surprised to see that Trump and his cronies are actually going ahead with their little trade war. Some have postulated that tariffs are just a bluff, part of some backwards 4D chess negotiation tactic, and yet, here we are, 100+% tariffs between China and the US. In principle, the Trump team's plan is quite simple. By imposing tariffs, they want to A. Isolate China while providing leverage for negotiations with other countries, and B. Turn the US back into an industrial, export-oriented economy. But could any of these plans ever work, even to a limited extent? Let's take a look. First, let's consider point A, isolating China and gaining leverage in trade negotiations with other countries. Just what does the Trump team plan to do here exactly? Especially with the whole threatening your closest allies bit. Have they gone mental, or is there a plan behind all this? Some might ask. Well, there is a plan in fact, and it's quite mental. Yanis Varoufakis wrote about this recently in an article you should definitely check out after this video. The plan here seems to be to basically split the world into two camps. Those who get to enjoy economic closeness to and military protection by America, and those who do not. So the first category would include most Western nations and most other West-aligned countries. The second category would then include the likes of China and Russia. So, what's the catch? Well, countries of the first category get to benefit from lower tariffs and military protection at the low price of America dominating their economies. Basically, they would be forced to let in American exports, move their industrial bases to the US, and then function as export markets for American products as America makes bank on this arrangement. Those countries that remain outside of this protection racket will be forced to pay the US in the form of tariffs. So is this plan viable? To quote an eternal classic,
sounds good, doesn't work, never gonna happen.
Turns out other countries might have differing opinions on this issue. If you try to strong-arm a bunch of countries into becoming your economic vassal states, they might just have something to say about it, especially when it comes to economic blocs which are about the same size as the US, like the European Union. See, these prospective vassal states might just start talking among each other, saying things like, wow, it would sure suck to lose our industry and become economically subservient to a country run by a bunch of incompetent, weird idiots. The EU is even giving its staff burner phones to stop them from being spied on in the US. And isn't that something? Burner phones are useful, but regular people need something more practical. Well, now, thanks to NordVPN, you can keep malicious actors out of your private life. Available both on Android, iOS and PC, NordVPN protects your privacy and personal data with just a single click. It even alerts you if you visit a fake online store and if you're about to fall victim to a scam thanks to NordVPN's Threat Protection Pro feature, which also doubles as a certified anti-phishing tool protecting you from phishing websites. And as a brand new feature, the Dark Web Monitor, alerting you in case your credentials are leaked anywhere so you can take steps immediately. The only thing it cannot protect you from is inviting a journalist to your illegal Signal chat room where you discuss US attack plans. NordVPN also protects you from malware by blocking dangerous ads and not letting you stray into malware-infested websites. All this is integrated into the NordVPN app itself, so no need to download additional bloatware. NordVPN is also a useful tool if you travel a lot, especially on public transit. I like to use their service when using public Wi-Fi networks on longer train trips. Additionally, if access is limited by time or amount of data, you can just flip a switch and use those limits all over again. Get NordVPN's 2-year plan plus 4 months free using my link nordvpn.com/adamsomething, which you will also find in the description. Subscribing is risk-free since it comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. So prospective vassal states see that the US is run by a bunch of idiots, so they instead form their own economic alliance, leaving the US out of it, like the EU-Mercosur trade agreement, or the EU-India free trade agreement, or a potential EU-China trade agreement. And this aggressive American posturing also incentivizes countries to look for a new global reserve currency, one that isn't controlled by a bunch of weird idiots, like the euro. And the latter is a particularly big problem for Trump and company. Global US financial dominance, their ultimate leverage, hinges on a strong US dollar, which is the result of it being the global reserve currency. If that status is gone, then suddenly the US becomes just another country. The reason why other countries put up with Trump's bullshit is because America is the global financial center of the world. They cannot be circumvented because they control the global reserve currency. But now it seems the Trump admin no longer wants to have that role, which is insane. Their reasons for not wanting it actually ties into their second goal, turning the US back into an industrial, export-oriented economy. In the second half of the 20th 20th century, America was famous for its manufacturing. This was the era when places like Detroit were at their height. Those idealized times when a factory worker was considered middle class and when the whole family could live on a single manufacturing salary. That world is gone, and the formerly booming towns and cities have since become rapidly depopulating urban wastelands ravaged by poverty, opioids, and neglect. And so Trump and company want to turn back the clock by forcing companies to return their manufacturing to the US, reviving the great industrial heartlands, ushering in a new golden age of economic growth. That's the plan anyway. And the reasonable question to ask here is, fucking how? The US economy is, quite simply, not set up for major industrialization and exports. It's set to siphon money out of everything it can to make shareholders richer. These are what we call stock buybacks. Basically, when a company makes $100 million, the company does not spend it on development. Instead, it gives the money to shareholders. And for shareholders, this is great. But for the companies and their employees, not so much. What if there is a bad year right after the stock buyback? Well, let's use our financial reserves to get through it. But hold on, we gave it all to shareholders last year. Uh-oh, looks like it's time for mass layoffs. So the end result is mass poverty and joblessness for workers, as shareholders pocket millions of dollars. This is a systemic issue that needs to be addressed with regulation, something the Trump team is notably not willing to do because that would go against the interest of the oligarchs backing them. Additionally, bringing major industrial capacities to the US is not a trivial task. It's not like those logistics centers you see popping up next to cities where they just build a big metal box and a month later it's already fully up and running. Heavy industry is a bit different from that, if you can imagine. You need industrial scale utilities built out. Roads, railroads, water, hazardous waste disposal, industrial water treatment. You need to upgrade the electricity grid. It's not a trivial task. And considering how the US manufacturing base has been left to rot for the past 5 decades, all of it needs to be rebuilt from scratch. And that would take years and billions of dollars. And much of the industrial equipment needed to start those factories is made in what country? Yet China, a country currently subject to 100+% tariffs. And these tariffs would need to stay in place indefinitely for US manufacturing to survive. The second the tariffs are gone, companies would start moving back to China due to lower production costs. Also, unemployment in the US is very low. Staffing those factories would require a large workforce. You usually get that through immigration, except the Trump team is gearing up for mass deportation, which is notably the opposite. So this big reindustrialization is just not going to happen, at least not on a large scale. Also because what if, and now try to stay with me on this, what if other economic blocs will do to the US what the US is doing to them right now? So, you know, hey America, that's a nice industrial base you got there. So nice that we have imposed a 100% tariff on all its products. Good luck, fuck you. And the standard MAGA response to this is, oh, then our industry will just produce to our own domestic market. But that just isn't big enough to sustain an industry the size of that of the 1970s. If you go the industrial route, you need to export, period. But even if this mythical, revived US industry starts producing to a global market tomorrow, they would get crushed by the competition. In 1970, exporting American cars was easy. Not many countries were making cars, and not in such quantity or quality. Today, we have a Chinese EV sector far outpacing any Western producer. Competitors are cheaper, more efficient, and more technologically advanced. You know, in Europe, sometimes you see American pickup trucks. They are mostly driven by socially maladapted middle-aged men unwilling to peacefully coexist in human society. Such pickup trucks are thankfully a very rare sight because they are horribly expensive, needlessly large, and consume more than 3 times the fuel compared to an average European car. Basically, you need to commit very hard to the asshole bit to actually get one. And the reason for American pickup's monstrous size is to fleece customers. Nothing more. US car companies were looking for ways to sell more cars and figured that instead of selling more cars to more customers, they could just sell each customer more car, singular. Why sell you a 1-ton hatchback when they can also sell you a 2.5-ton pickup? With the pickup, you're essentially paying for 2.5 cars, while getting only one. And while this practice is great for the American market, turns out the global market is rather limited when it comes to $80,000 oversized gas guzzlers. Imagine that. Many American products are just not viable as exports. They are designed to fleece US customers in a protected market, not to compete abroad. And it's not like the US lets competitors' cars into its domestic market, like Chinese EVs, to compete with American cars, so why would other countries let in American cars? So if America wants to become an export powerhouse, it must ensure that there are as few tariffs as possible, as low as possible. But wasn't this the exact problem so far that Trump and company have been raging about? Their problem is with the current global system of free trade, which supposedly disadvantages US industry. But that's mostly due to the way the US economy works, which I've talked about earlier, focusing on paying out investors instead of actual development. It's not that the US has been getting bad deals from other countries. It's that US industrial products products are not that great anymore, and that the US financial sector has turned the industrial sector, and the whole country for that matter, into their very own ATM machine. This is a result of the global neoliberal economic system and a lack of US financial sector regulations. Now, this system has worked out quite well for quite a few people. This is where the elephant curve comes in, showing us that in this system, pretty much everyone profited except for the world's poorest and the Western middle class. Additionally, the top 1% profited a lot. A 60% income growth is very different when you're making $15 a day versus 15 million. Okay, so with all that in mind, let's recap. The US tries to strong-arm allies into becoming economic vessels, wants to bring back manufacturing to its territory, and seeks to become an export-oriented economy. But the allies, or former allies, are fighting back and will not become vassals. The US would need more workers, but is currently getting ready for mass deportations. US products are not cutting edge at best and are a scheme to fleece customers at worst. And the US economy is set to extract money from industry, not vice versa. And on top of this comes yet another problem: US military power, the upkeep of which is completely incompatible with the US being an export economy. And just how does that work? Currency. Every country has it. If your currency is strong, you can buy more stuff from other countries whose currencies are weaker. If your currency is weak, you can sell more stuff to other countries whose currencies are stronger. For example, let's say the US dollar and the euro are perfectly equal. $1 equals 1 euro, and that the EU-US tariffs are 0. So if a European car company makes a car costing 20,000 euros, a US customer can buy it for $20,000. But if the dollar is stronger, so let's say $1 equals 2 euros, then that 20,000 euro car will only cost $10,000 for the US customer. A strong currency is great when you want to buy stuff from abroad because you can get it for cheap. On the other hand, if the dollar is weaker, so let's say $2 equal 1 euro, then that 20,000 euro European-made car will cost $40,000 for the US customer. On the flip side, now the American-made car costing $20,000 will only cost 10,000 euros to the European customer. So now the US can go nuts with its exports, revving up those factories, ushering in a new golden age of manufacturing. Except, US military power kind of hinges on a strong dollar. With the fact that it's the global reserve currency, the US dollar is highly valued no matter what, enabling the US to upkeep a military of such size and strength. Building and maintaining their military depends on many foreign suppliers. To give you just one example, major parts of the F-35 are made in the UK, Japan, Norway, Denmark, Canada, Netherlands, Italy, Austria, and so on. And all those parts are made cheaper for the US by a strong US dollar. And you also can't just move these hyper-complex supply chains to the US overnight. It would take decades, assuming that all those other countries would willingly part with their military industry and pool of experts, which they won't. So if you want to export stuff, you have to weaken the dollar. But if you weaken the dollar, the US military needs to be downsized. But if you downsize the US military, you undercut the benefit of a military umbrella in exchange for being a US vassal state. And a weak dollar would also mean that the rest of the world would need to look for another global reserve currency, meaning the US would no longer reign supreme in the global finance sector. So if the US wants to become a manufacturing powerhouse, it needs to weaken the dollar. But then, being the world financial and military hegemon goes right out the fucking window, which kills most of America's leverage on the global stage. As in, why would China, India, or the EU listen to Trump at that point? The EU is the world's new financial center, and the Chinese, Indian, and European armies are now on par with the American, so why should they give a shit about what Trump wants or thinks? Give us what we want, world, or we'll stop exporting our overpriced, oversized, shitty pickup trucks. Oh no, what a disaster! Right when those rural Chinese and Indian families were clamoring to buy a Ford F-150 Raptor with the supercharged Predator V8 engine. No, come on. No, Trump's plan will not work. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too, basically. So with that being said, what would work? Regulations and investing into American society's welfare. Limiting the amount of stock buybacks, so companies will invest into themselves instead of functioning as ATM machines for finance bros. Linking decaying areas with high-speed rail to plug them back into the economic circulation. Spreading major corporations' sites across the country so they aren't all concentrated in like 3 cities, making those places completely unaffordable. Eliminating legal loopholes car makers use to bypass environmental regulations to sell giant pickup trucks instead of regular, cheaper, economical cars. Enacting Medicare for all so that people no longer die on the streets due to curable diseases because they couldn't afford treatment in the richest country on the planet. Nationalize universities so they start functioning as actual actual places of learning instead of sports and real estate management firms with classrooms attached. Set a higher federal minimum wage, more paid vacation days, mandatory severance periods, hell, even the 4-day work week to increase employees' well-being. Overhaul zoning laws so that more housing can be built in areas that need it the most, driving down the cost of living. These are just some of the things the US government could do to help restore its middle class and lift millions out of poverty. The problem is not that manufacturing is gone, it's that the economy is set up to suck everyone and everything dry. There is still an ungodly amount of money circulating in the US economy. It's just that ordinary people see less and less of it since more and more of that money is concentrated at the top. It's that simple. America's economy is like a rickety, rusty old gas guzzler wreck of a car driven by a bunch of finance bros desperate to wring as much profit out of it as possible before it breaks apart completely. The car has been getting slower for the past decades and the rattling noises are getting louder. The car needs a complete overhaul. But instead of that, Trump just wants to slap a V12 engine into it and call it a day. The US needs systemic changes. Not today, not yesterday, more like 20 years ago. An overcharged manufacturing sector, if feasible at all, might be able to mask problems for a while, but eventually they will all come back to haunt America. If, by then, there will be an America at all. Which at this rate I'm not so sure of, honestly.